Sometimes sequels are terrible, like Batman and Robin or The Son of the Mask. Other times they're spectacular, like The Empire Strikes Back or The Dark Knight. So where does Ant-Man and the Wasp fall? Well, it's not quite as good as The Dark Knight, but it's still really fun and a great movie. The story picks up 2 years after Civil War, but right before Infinity War. Now, Scott Lang is on house arrest, and he has been for the last 2 years because of his participation in Civil War. He violated the Sokovia Accords, and so now he just, as a punishment, he has to stay at home on house arrest, can't go outside, can't even literally leave his house, otherwise he goes to prison for 20 years or more. Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne are also on the run because Scott used their tech. So when we join the story, Scott only has a few days left of his house arrest, and then he's kind of a free man. Well, at least he's on probation, but he gets to get out of the house and he gets to explore and he gets to see the world again. Paul Rudd is wonderful as Scott Lang. He is sarcastic and funny and also heartwarming. He's kind of that crook with a heart of gold. He loves his daughter and he's very loyal to his friends. Now, I love that Paul Rudd gets to flex his comedic chops again in this. It just makes it so much better, and it really draws me into his character because he seems very real and very relatable. We get a lot more of Hank Pym's story in this, and Michael Douglas does a really good job of playing the cranky genius scientist. With Scott going into the quantum realm and returning in the first Ant-Man, it's given Hank a lot more hope and a lot more drive that maybe his wife is still alive and can be rescued. Evangeline Lilly returns as Hope Van Dyne in this one, and she gets a lot more screen time thanks to being the Wasp. She and Paul Rudd work really well together and they have a lot of good chemistry. She's strong and smart and is a really good superhero just on her own. She also fights really well, and the scenes that they have her in are just awesome as she shrinks and then expands and she's doing all this martial arts and just kicking butt all over the place. Thankfully, Michael Pena returns as Luis, and he has a lot more screen time than he did in the previous one. He is a rapid-fire, storytelling, ex-con turned legitimate businessman. I love the fact that the movie makes fun of itself a little bit and calls attention to the fact that Luis is this random storyteller guy who tells these really long stories that may or may not actually have anything to do with what you asked. It also allows the other characters to kind of act out Michael Pena telling these stories. And so they have the whole attitude that he brings to the story as he retells it. So if you've seen the first one, if you've seen Ant-Man, you know that as he's telling these stories, they're just like, Hannah John-Kamen is Ghost. And she plays the character with this desperate longing or searching and this pain. And it's really convincing, and she does a really good job. I loved seeing her in this. Her character basically comes out of nowhere, and that's not a pun. That's just she's not part of the story, and then all of a sudden she's there. And even though that happens, the storytellers do a really good job of giving her a full backstory and something that we can relate to, that we enjoy, that we're drawn into, and now we're committed to her character and we want to see more. DC writers should actually take note of this. This is how you do a character with a short backstory that's fully developed. She also has some really impressive fighting skills that make her a very worthy opponent to Ant-Man and the Wasp. Michelle Pfeiffer and Lawrence Fishburne are great in this also. They only have minimal screen time, but they definitely maximize their performance when they're on screen. Walton Goggins is a semi-villain. Now, he's a lot more likable as a villain, or maybe he's just a better bad guy, I guess you could say, than he was in Tomb Raider. He's fun to watch, and although he doesn't have a huge role in the film, I definitely enjoyed his character and I enjoyed seeing him on screen. Now, there are some questions that I have about some very minor points in the film. Like, is it possible to make clothes when you're in the quantum realm? And then also, is there oxygen in the quantum realm? How do you breathe, or do you need a mask the entire time? These don't really have any impact in the outcome of the story, but as we dive into the quantum realm a little bit, I found myself asking these. I'm an MCU fan, and so there's not much in this that I didn't like. I also enjoyed the fact that it was directed by Peyton Reed, who did the first Ant-Man, so the sequel retains a lot of the look and the feel and the character of that first one. There's a ton of action, way more than was in the first one, and also a lot of comedy. I laughed out loud a bunch of times. It also has some quieter and softer emotional moments that don't seem out of place at all. The whole story flows really well and kept me engaged the entire time. There's a mid-credit scene and a post-credit scene, and one is way more important than the other, but you should stay for both because they're both good. There's no sex or nudity, a bunch of superhero violence, and some brief language. I had a blast watching Ant-Man and the Wasp. I think you'll enjoy it too, especially if you're an MCU fan. I give Ant-Man and the Wasp 4.5 out of 5 couches. What's your favorite superhero sequel? Or maybe even just your favorite Marvel sequel? I'd love to know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.